Uncle Gnarley is a hard act to follow. So I want to start, first of all, by thanking Steve Crocker and Lisa Moore and Carrie Neal for doing such a wonderful job of organizing this. Can you hear this okay? Yeah, okay. And also all the other speakers. I really learned a lot from everybody. It was a real privilege to get to sit through the whole day and hear everyone. And a public service announcement from Angus Anderson. He has more of these Muskrat Falls water stickers, now with 10% methyl mercury. So he's over there if you want to. Okay, so I'm going to come at this panel on journalism, democracy, and the control of information through what might seem like quite a narrow focus. What are the implications for democracy in this province of the charges laid against Justin Brake for reporting the October 2016 occupation of the Muskrat Falls worksite? More specifically, what are the implications of Nalcor's attempt through the courts and the RCMP to characterize his journalistic work as a crime against property? And I will say that, you know, some of this resonates with some of the earlier talks today. And initially I was kind of worried about that. I thought I'm just going to be repeating what other people said. But then I started to think this really points to the salience of this issue in the logic of the questions that we're addressing. So along the way, I'll draw on Timothy Mitchell's distinction between two senses of democracy. We often equate democratic struggle with claims for justice and equality, but as Mitchell notes, democracy also refers to a method of governing by popular consent or some reference to popular consent, such that those claims for greater justice are kept in check by dividing the world into ostensibly separate spheres of governance. Only some of these are subject to public contestation. So think, for example, of the only common sense, not in Uncle Gnarly's sense, but the only common sense division between the private sphere governed by rules of property, the natural world governed by rules of nature, and markets governed by principles of economics. In this second sense, democratic struggles become struggles over the boundaries between these spheres of governance, struggles to move issues that have been set aside as private or legal and therefore non-political into the sphere of public contestation, for example. Now, everyone in this room is probably familiar with the broad details of the civil and criminal charges that have been laid against Justin when he was working for the Independent, but as a summary reminder, I'll just sketch the history of those events. So on October 22nd, 2016, about 40 Inuit, and settler Labradorians cut the lock on the main worksite at Muskrat Falls and walked to the workers' living quarters, which they occupied peacefully for 4 days. This occupation followed weeks of campaigns in Labrador and on the island to make Muskrat right in light of the provincial government's refusal to address scientific research suggesting that Muskrat Falls would lead to significant methyl mercury contamination of water and wild food if mitigation measures weren't taken. By this point, Billy Gauthier had been on hunger strike for over a week and had been joined by several others a few days earlier. Justin Brake was the only journalist to follow the land protectors through the gate and the only one to report from inside the occupied work camp. His stories and live-streamed coverage were followed by tens of thousands of people provincially, nationally, and internationally. The Independent's reporting provided vital information at one of the most critical junctures in this province's recent history. It also corrected misinformation and speculation about the nature of the occupation. Rumors that the occupation had turned violent, for instance, were easily dismissed because there was a journalist on site to demonstrate that the occupation was continuing as peacefully as it had started. And I think those kinds of things are vital given how such rumors serve as justification for heavy-handed policing. On October 24th, Nalcor secured a new court order compelling the police to arrest Justin if he didn't leave the work site. Once he learned about this injunction, Justin left the site. It was not a decision he took lightly, as anyone who saw and heard the land protectors express their fears about what might happen to them without a reporter present will know. Those fears alone speak volumes to the importance of a free press in a democracy, particularly for people without the resources available to powerful corporations and governments. The land protectors ended their occupation on October 26th after Premier Dwight Ball finally held an extended emergency meeting with Indigenous leaders, a meeting held notably and shamefully in St. John's rather than Labrador, And I remember standing outside Confederation building with Denise, waiting for the answer to come down, and it was, you know, midnight or later, wasn't it, by the time there was actually some sort of result from that meeting. Subsequently, the RCMP laid criminal charges of mischief and disobeying a court injunction against Justin and more than 24 people who were involved in the occupation. Justin's lawyer, Jeff Budden, argued that the injunction should be overturned because Nalcor had failed to inform the court of the material fact that Justin was a working journalist when it applied for the injunction against him. Judge George Murphy rejected this argument at the outset. Justin, through Jeff, is appealing that decision. On the charge of mischief exceeding $5,000, the RCMP has resisted attempts to or requests to reveal what evidence led them to lay the charges, despite the fact that Justin was not an instigator of or a participant in the occupation. As he has said, Nalcor and the RCMP have both acknowledged that I didn't engage in any kind of destructive behavior. All I am guilty of is being physically present where the story was. In short, these charges entail an attempt to redefine Justin's work as a news-gathering journalist as a crime against property. This brings me back to the crux of my argument about the nature of the democratic struggle at hand. As I noted above, Timothy Mitchell argues that democracy carries two kinds of meaning. To quote from his book, Carbon Democracy, Political Power in the Age of Oil, democracy can refer to ways of making effective claims for a more just and egalitarian common world, or it can refer to a mode of governing populations that employs popular consent as a means of limiting such claims by dividing up the common world. Only certain areas get acknowledged as matters of public concern. Other fields are to be administered under alternative methods of control. For example, governmental practice can demarcate a private sphere governed by rules of property, a natural world governed by rules of nature, or markets governed by principles of economics. In consequence, democratic struggles become a battle over the distribution of issues. They become a struggle to establish that issues that others claim as private, as belonging to nature, or as ruled by the laws of the market are actually matters of public concern. In the rest of this talk, I want to argue that the criminalization of Justin Brake's journalism is diagnostic of two sets of democratic struggle ongoing in this province and this country. First, we have a struggle on Mitchell's second order, a struggle to insist that the matters at hand remain open political questions, a struggle against attempts to privatize them, rendering them matters of property to be adjudicated legally, that is, non-political, with the terms of debate settled by what the courts rule as admissible. Paradoxically, in this case, that means challenging Nalcor's assertion that it is in the public interest, or that the public interest is best served by treating its claims to private property as sacrosanct. By extension, conflicts over what Justin Brake was up to when he followed protesters, or protectors, I should say, onto the worksite in October 2016 are struggles over which idea of democracy takes precedence, the one more focused on building a just and egalitarian shared world, or the version in which popular consent, or at least a regime legitimated by it, is used to limit such claims by dividing that common world into different spheres, public and private, legal, economic, and political, for example. Central to both struggles is the way the civil and criminal cases against Justin Brake amount to a conflict between two sets of rights, rights relating to property and the right to press freedom. Now, the right to press freedom is constitutionally enshrined in Canada. Section 2B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees as one of our fundamental freedoms the freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. As set out in the Charter's opening section, this right can only be constrained by such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Can the civil and criminal charges against Justin Brake pass this test? Only if you accept that private property rights trump the right to a free press. The clear provocation entailed in any such claim may be one reason for Nalcor's attempt to exclude Justin's status as a journalist from the adjudication of his case. As we heard this morning, the situation is further complicated by the fact that Nalcor's claim to the property in question is itself contested in a whole variety of ways by Indigenous Labradorians, who, as Pam Palmater has pointed out, were also asserting their charter rights to protect their lands and territories, as well as their right to hold to laws that predate those of the Canadian state. On the last point, it's critical to recall that, contrary to common sense ideas, property is not a self-evident thing in the world. It is brought into being by relationships between social beings. As such, it is social and political through and through. By extension, there are different ways of understanding claims to property. Nalcor's position is based on the claim that it had the right to exclude others from its property. But as C.B. Macpherson noted 40 years ago, property rights can also be understood as the right not to be excluded from the benefits of some shared property. The right, say, to clean water and safe food, or to draw from Patrick Wolfe and Audra Simpson, among many others, the right to exist as a people. To end with a few suggestions pertinent to the panel theme, journalism, democracy, and the control of information, if we're serious about defending democracy in Mitchell's first sense, that is, democracy as defined by the struggle for a more just and equal shared world, then we need to challenge any attempt to neutralize that struggle by presenting the law, the market, and politics as self-evidently separate spheres of government or administration. In turn, this means talking about what rights constitute enabling conditions for any struggle for social justice. On this front, we must insist that the charter right to a free press extends to the critical journalistic role of news gathering, not simply to freedom of expression in some free-floating Jordan Peterson-esque sense. I would add that this defense of news-gathering journalists is particularly important for those groups without ready access to the resources that would let them make their case or avoid scrutiny, as the case may be. We must also be ready to challenge willfully naive ideas of journalistic objectivity, particularly when journalists are reporting on protest movements that challenge the status quo. Somewhat paradoxically, the anti-politics of this case hinge on claims that Justin was not doing journalism, but by his very presence was part of a protest movement. I suspect that this claim would not have been made had even one journalist from the conventional press joined him when he walked through the gates. And here I will simply note that while Justin has won several press freedom awards and has been defended by national and international organizations, including Rapporteurs Sans Frontières and many journalists unions, freedom of expression organizations. So his case has been championed by all those organizations. Some local journalists and editors withheld support. I will simply suggest that the failure to report dissenting perspectives does not constitute neutrality or objectivity. More broadly, we need to reinvigorate debates about the role of property in democratic life, and also to denaturalize the widespread but historically specific idea that property is inherently private and exclusive. This is particularly salient given the centrality of property to the logic of settler colonialism, and as Kim Tallbear has said, the extent to which settler courts have privileged these ideas. On that front, then, I believe it's telling that early in this process, the Aboriginal People's Television Network, APTN, which Justin is now working for, sought intervenor status in the civil case against him. APTN's interest speaks to the special threat that this case poses to journalists' ability to cover Indigenous-led protests involving disputes over large extraction projects, hydroelectric dams, pipelines, and so forth. If journalists are in danger of being arrested and jailed whenever they cover protests that take place on what one party claims as their private property, the implications for Indigenous people's ability to have their voices heard and to claim their rights will be very seriously impaired. So I'm going to end with a segue to Justin. In a conversation a year or more ago about these ongoing, and I should have probably noted that we worked together on The Independent, so my perspective is informed by that. But Justin reflected that in the bigger fight for social justice, there are some moments that are especially critical, but that can be difficult to recognize at the time. These are moments when it is particularly important not to allow public silence or public pressure to win out. His case represents one of those moments for democratic life in the most fundamental sense, and dare I say it, for ongoing struggles to interrupt the logic of settler colonialism in this country. Thanks.